Sometimes the most dangerous lie isn't told by criminals. It's told by the people wearing the badge. Rain slammed against the pavement of Ashbury like the city itself was trying to wash away its sins, but nothing about that night could be cleaned. Red and blue lights flashed violently across soaked storefront windows while a crowd gathered behind yellow police tape. Phones raised high, whispers spreading faster than the storm. In the middle of the street, Officer Daniel Mercer stood over a black man pressed against the hood of a patrol car, his jaw tight, one hand gripping the back of the man's jacket while the other rested near his holster. The man never fought back. He didn't yell, didn't curse, didn't even flinch when the cold rain rolled down his face and soaked through his dark gray coat. He just stared ahead with an expression so calm it unsettled everyone watching. "You fit the description," Daniel snapped loudly, making sure the crowd could hear him. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The man slowly turned his head, his eyes steady despite the pressure against his shoulders. "And what exactly is the description tonight, officer?" The question landed harder than Daniel expected. For half a second, the street seemed quieter. A woman near the sidewalk lowered her phone. A teenager standing under a bus stop looked away awkwardly. But Daniel's pride was already too deep in the moment to stop now. "Name," he demanded. The man hesitated just long enough to irritate him. "Elijah Brooks." Daniel repeated it under his breath, while rainwater dripped from the edge of his uniform cap. He had been a cop for nearly 12 years, long enough to trust instincts more than paperwork, and something about Elijah Brooks made every alarm in his body go off. It wasn't just the silence. It was the confidence. Most people became nervous under flashing lights. Most people explained themselves. This man looked like he already knew how the night would end. Daniel tightened his grip slightly. "Witnesses said a man matching your appearance was seen near the alley behind Franklin Market 20 minutes before the incident." Elijah looked toward the crowd instead of answering. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the city skyline. "You ever notice," Elijah said quietly, "how people only see what they're already afraid of?" Daniel's expression hardened instantly. "Save the speeches." A second patrol unit pulled up nearby, tires splashing through puddles. Two officers stepped out, exchanging quick glances when they saw Daniel already escalating the stop. One of them, Officer Reed, approached carefully. "Daniel, dispatch says they still don't have full confirmation from the witness." Daniel ignored him. His attention stayed locked on Elijah, who remained strangely composed beneath the flashing lights. Then Daniel noticed something odd. Elijah's hands. No shaking, no panic, just stillness. The kind of stillness Daniel had only seen in soldiers returning from combat zones or men who had spent years learning how to survive pressure without showing fear. That realization irritated him even more. "You think you're smarter than everybody here?" Daniel asked. Elijah finally looked him directly in the eye. "No," he answered calmly. "I think somebody wants you looking at the wrong man." The rain intensified, hammering the pavement around them while the crowd murmured louder. Daniel felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Not doubt, not yet, but discomfort. Because standing there beneath the bleeding police lights, staring into Elijah Brooks' unshaken eyes, Officer Daniel Mercer suddenly realized something he couldn't explain. The man in front of him didn't look afraid of being arrested. He looked afraid of something else entirely. The rain finally eased into a cold mist by the time Officer Daniel Mercer drove back toward the 7th Precinct, but the tension sitting in his chest refused to disappear. Water streaked across the windshield while the city lights of Ashbury blurred into long lines of red and gold. Elijah Brooks sat silently in the back seat with his hands resting calmly in his lap, his expression unreadable beneath the glow of passing streetlights. Most people talked during rides like this. Some begged, some cursed, others tried to explain themselves before paperwork even started. Elijah did none of it. That silence kept digging under Daniel's skin like a splinter he could not pull out. The police radio crackled softly with routine dispatch calls, but Daniel barely listened. His mind kept replaying the same moment over and over. "I think somebody wants you looking at the wrong man." The words sounded simple at first, yet something about the way Elijah said them felt deliberate, controlled, like he had rehearsed them long before tonight ever happened. Daniel glanced into the rearview mirror. Elijah was looking out the window now, watching the empty sidewalks drift past beneath flickering neon signs and broken street lamps. Entire blocks of Ashbury looked abandoned after midnight. Storefronts boarded up, graffiti covering brick walls, sirens echoing from neighborhoods most politicians only mentioned during election season. The city had been changing for years, and not for the better. Official reports called it economic decline. The people living there called it survival. 3 black men had disappeared from the east side in the last 4 months. No witnesses. No suspects. Every investigation stalled before it reached the evening news. Community leaders demanded answers, while city officials repeated the same polished phrases at press conferences. Ongoing investigation. No confirmed connections. Public safety remains our priority. Daniel had worked enough cases to know when people were hiding things. The problem was he no longer knew who people meant anymore. When they arrived at the precinct, the lobby buzzed with low conversation and fluorescent light humming above old tile floors. Officers moved between desks carrying coffee cups and half-finished reports while television monitors near the ceiling replayed local headlines. Another protest was scheduled downtown that weekend. Another rally against police misconduct. Another argument dividing the city deeper than before. Daniel opened the back door of the cruiser. Out. Elijah stepped onto the wet pavement without resistance. A few officers inside the lobby immediately looked over. Some recognized Daniel. Others recognized the look on his face. Officer Reed approached carefully from near the front desk. Dispatch updated the witness statement, he said quietly. The description changed. Daniel's jaw tightened. Changed how? Reed hesitated. The witness could not positively identify Elijah. For a moment, nobody spoke. Somewhere deeper in the station, a printer beeped repeatedly while phones rang unanswered. Daniel looked toward Elijah again, expecting satisfaction or smugness, but the man only stood there calmly beneath the harsh white lights. That almost made it worse. You should let him go, Reed added carefully. Daniel ignored him. Instead, he walked toward the booking desk and pulled Elijah's nearly empty file from the printer tray. No prior arrests. No active warrants. No meaningful employment history. Almost nothing at all. But then Daniel noticed a small line near the bottom of the report. Federal clearance restriction. Access denied. His eyes narrowed immediately. Who are you really? He asked quietly. Elijah looked directly at him, his voice calm enough to chill the room around them. That depends on whether you still think I am the suspect. The room seemed colder after Elijah said those words. Officer Daniel Mercer stood motionless near the booking desk while fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and distant police radios filled the silence with static. Around him, officers pretended to focus on paperwork, but everyone was listening now. Elijah Brooks did not look nervous. That alone disturbed Daniel more than he wanted to admit. Most people changed once they stepped inside a police station. Their confidence faded beneath the lights, the uniforms, the sound of metal doors opening and closing somewhere down the hall. Elijah remained calm like he had walked into that building 100 times before. Daniel grabbed the thin file again, flipping through the pages with growing irritation. Federal clearance restriction. The words repeated in his mind like a warning sign. He had seen classified notices before, but never attached to someone who looked like a ghost in the system. No address history beyond 3 years. No social media presence. No employment records except vague transportation contracts spread across multiple states. It was like someone had carefully erased every footprint Elijah Brooks ever made. Run him again. Daniel ordered sharply toward the dispatcher. Every database. The young dispatcher hesitated. I already did. Then do it again. Elijah watched quietly while rain tapped softly against the precinct windows. Outside, Ashbury remained soaked in darkness. The city always felt different after midnight. The streets became quieter, but somehow heavier. Like every secret hidden during daylight finally started breathing once the sun disappeared. Daniel walked toward the coffee station near the hallway, rubbing exhaustion from his face. He had not slept properly in weeks. Ever since the disappearances started piling up on the east side, pressure inside the department had become unbearable. Community leaders demanded action. News stations accused the police of incompetence. Protesters gathered outside City Hall almost every weekend. And somewhere inside all of it, Daniel kept hearing the same whispered rumor from officers who worked night patrol. Somebody inside the department was leaking information. He never believed it completely. Until now. You are chasing the wrong thing, Elijah said calmly from across the room. Daniel turned immediately. You do not get to tell me how to do my job. Elijah lowered his eyes briefly before answering. No, but somebody should. The tension inside the station tightened instantly. Officer Reed shifted uncomfortably near the front desk, while another officer quietly muted the television mounted on the wall. Daniel stepped closer, frustration building beneath his skin. You think because your file is sealed you can walk in here acting superior? Elijah looked directly at him again. This is not about superiority. Then what is it about? For the first time all night, Elijah hesitated. Not fear. Something else. Like he was deciding how much truth Daniel could handle. People are disappearing in this city, Elijah said quietly. And the reason nobody finds them is because everyone keeps looking outward instead of inward. Daniel felt a chill move through him despite the warm air inside the precinct. He glanced toward the bullpen where detectives worked late night, cases beneath rows of flickering lights. For a moment, he noticed something strange. Conversation stopping when he looked over. Officers avoiding eye contact. A door near the records room quietly shutting. Tiny details. Tiny shifts. But suddenly they felt impossible to ignore. Then the front entrance opened. A tall man in a dark overcoat stepped inside, carrying an umbrella dripping rainwater across the tile floor. He was not local law enforcement. Daniel could tell instantly from the posture alone. The man scanned the room once before locking eyes with Elijah. You need to release him, the stranger said calmly. Daniel squared his shoulders. And who exactly are you? The man reached slowly into his coat pocket and revealed a federal badge. The entire room went silent. Special Agent Victor Hale, he said. And right now, officer, you are standing in the middle of an operation far bigger than you understand. The silence inside the precinct became suffocating after Special Agent Victor Hale showed his badge. Even the constant buzzing of fluorescent lights seemed quieter now, as if the building itself understood something had shifted. Officer Daniel Mercer stared at the federal credentials for several long seconds before lowering his eyes toward Elijah Brooks again. Suddenly, the missing records, the restricted files, and the impossible calm all started fitting together in ways Daniel did not like. You are telling me this man is federal? Daniel asked carefully. Victor Hale closed his umbrella beside the front desk, rainwater dripping onto the tile floor. I am telling you that your department was instructed not to interfere with him. Daniel's expression darkened instantly. Nobody informed me. That was intentional. The answer hit harder than Daniel expected. Around the station, officers quietly exchanged glances while pretending not to listen. Officer Reed slowly stepped backward toward the coffee machine, clearly wanting distance from whatever this situation was becoming. Daniel folded his arms tightly across his chest. You expect me to believe a man wandering near an active crime scene with no identification is somehow protected? Victor remained calm. I expect you to understand there are things happening in this city beyond local patrol reports. Daniel almost laughed, but there was nothing funny about the tension building in the room. Ashbury had always carried secrets beneath its streets. Everybody knew that. Corrupt landlords. Missing evidence. Politicians making promises in front of cameras while entire neighborhoods collapsed behind them. But federal involvement meant something much bigger. Something dangerous. Elijah finally spoke again, his voice low and controlled. You asked earlier who I really am. Daniel looked toward him sharply. Elijah continued. Right now that is not the question you should be asking. Daniel took a slow step forward. Then help me understand what question I should ask. Elijah held his stare without blinking. Ask why people disappear after talking to the police. The room froze again. Somewhere in the hallway, a metal door slammed shut. A detective carrying files stopped walking for half a second before quickly moving again. Daniel noticed all of it. Every nervous glance. Every stiff posture. Every officer suddenly avoiding eye contact. For the first time in years, a feeling Daniel hated began creeping into him. Uncertainty. Victor Hale approached the booking desk and placed a sealed folder beside the computer monitor. You have a reputation for being aggressive, Officer Mercer, he said evenly. But aggressive does not always mean corrupt. That is why you are still standing here. Daniel frowned. Still, Victor ignored the question. The wrong people inside this city are being protected, and the closer someone gets to the truth, the faster they disappear. Daniel glanced at Elijah again. So what? He is bait. Elijah answered before Victor could. No, his eyes narrowed slightly beneath the harsh station lights. I am the person they were hoping you would never notice. A cold chill moved through Daniel's chest. Outside the precinct windows, thunder rolled across Ashbury again, while red traffic lights reflected off rain-soaked streets. The city suddenly felt smaller, tighter, like invisible walls were closing around everyone inside that building. Then Daniel noticed something that made his stomach drop. A patrol officer near the records room quietly slipped a cell phone into his pocket the moment Victor mentioned corruption. The officer turned and disappeared down the hallway almost immediately. Daniel's instincts sharpened instantly. Who was that? Reed looked over nervously. That was Officer Tanner. Daniel's voice lowered. Where is he going? Nobody answered. Then every computer monitor inside the bullpen suddenly flickered at the exact same moment. The lights dimmed briefly. Police radios crackled with static. And somewhere deep inside the station, an alarm began quietly beeping. The quiet alarm continued pulsing through the precinct like a heartbeat nobody wanted to acknowledge. Soft, repetitive, unsettling. Officer Daniel Mercer turned toward the hallway leading to the records division while every instinct inside him screamed that something was wrong. The bullpen no longer sounded normal. Phones had stopped ringing. Conversations had disappeared. Even the older detectives who usually argued across desks were suddenly silent beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. Special Agent Victor Hale moved first. Lock down the exits, he ordered calmly. Nobody moved. That hesitation told Daniel more than words ever could. Officers looked toward each other instead of responding immediately, as if they were waiting to see who would react first. Elijah Brooks remained standing near the booking desk with the same impossible composure he had carried all night, but his eyes followed the hallway carefully now. Focused, alert, like he had been expecting this moment. Daniel stepped toward the records corridor without waiting for permission. Tanner, he shouted. No answer. The hallway lights flickered weakly overhead as he moved deeper into the station. Old photographs of retired officers lined the walls beside framed commendations and faded department awards. Daniel had walked these halls for years, yet suddenly the building felt unfamiliar. Colder. Behind him, Victor and Elijah followed at a measured pace, while Officer Reed stayed near the front desk radioing dispatch. The alarm sound grew louder near records. Processing. Beep, beep, beep. Daniel reached the security door and froze. The keypad access panel had been ripped open. Wires hung loose from the wall. What the hell? He muttered under his breath. Victor's expression hardened immediately. That system was federalized last month. Daniel turned sharply. Federalized for what? Victor looked toward Elijah before answering. Because evidence started disappearing. The words landed like concrete in Daniel's chest. For months, rumors had circulated through the department about missing files connected to unsolved disappearances. Witness statements erased. Surveillance footage corrupted. Officers blamed technical failures. Budget cuts. Outdated systems. But standing there now beside torn wires and broken security panels, Daniel realized something terrifying. None of it had been accidental. Elijah slowly stepped closer to the damaged keypad. They know somebody is getting close. Daniel looked at him carefully. Who? Elijah's jaw tightened slightly for the first time all night. People inside this building. Thunder shook the station windows again, while rainwater slid down the glass like dark veins across the city outside. Daniel suddenly remembered every strange thing he had ignored over the past year. Detectives abruptly transferred after asking too many questions. Informants disappearing before testimony. Cases reassigned without explanation. And officers quietly warning each other not to dig too deep into East Side investigations. At the time, Daniel told himself that was just politics. Department survival. But now the pieces felt connected in ways he could no longer dismiss. Victor pulled a small flashlight from his coat pocket and scanned the floor near the security room entrance. Door was opened less than 10 minutes ago. Daniel noticed faint muddy footprints disappearing deeper inside the records archive. Officer boots. Size 11, maybe 12. Fresh rainwater still glistening on the tile floor. Daniel's pulse quickened. Tanner. Elijah looked toward him carefully. You trusted him? Daniel answered too quickly. I worked with him for 4 years. Elijah's expression did not change. That was not my question. Silence filled the hallway again. Somewhere nearby, a computer monitor suddenly powered off with a sharp click. Then another. One by one, lights inside the records room began shutting down until only emergency backup lighting remained glowing faint red across rows of filing cabinets. Daniel felt the hair rise on the back of his neck. Victor immediately lowered his voice. Nobody touches anything. But Daniel was already staring toward the final row of cabinets near the back wall, where a single drawer stood partially open. Inside it, barely visible beneath flickering red light, sat a thick file stamped with one word across the front in bold black letters. Mercer. Officer Daniel Mercer stared at the file with his own name stamped across the front, while red emergency lights washed the records room in a dim crimson glow. For a second, he forgot the storm outside. Forgot the broken security panel. Forgot Elijah Brooks and the federal agents standing behind him. All he could see was his own name sitting inside a confidential archive like evidence in somebody else's investigation. Slowly, Daniel reached for the folder. Do not touch it, Victor Hale warned immediately. Daniel ignored him. His fingers tightened around the edge of the file before he pulled it free from the cabinet drawer. The folder felt heavier than paper should have felt. Inside were photographs, surveillance stills, printed call logs, financial records. Daniel's breathing slowed as he flipped through pages illuminated by flickering red light. His patrol routes highlighted across city maps. Lists of dates, witness names, missing persons reports. Then his eyes locked onto something that made his stomach tighten instantly. Every missing person connected to the East Side disappearances had crossed paths with him at least once before vanishing. Daniel looked up sharply. This is insane. Victor remained calm. That file was never meant to accuse you. Then why does it look like I am being investigated? Elijah finally stepped closer, his voice quieter now. Because somebody wanted it to. The words echoed through the nearly dark records room while rain hammered the station windows harder than before. Daniel shook his head immediately. No, somebody planted this. Exactly, Elijah answered. Daniel looked at him carefully. For the first time all night, he noticed exhaustion beneath Elijah's calm exterior. Not fear. Not weakness. Fatigue. The kind carried by people who had spent too long chasing truths nobody else wanted uncovered. Elijah lowered his eyes briefly before speaking again. 6 months ago, federal investigators intercepted communications tied to trafficking operations moving through Ashbury. Daniel frowned. Trafficking. Victor nodded once. Women. Teenagers. Mostly from vulnerable neighborhoods where disappearances do not generate national attention. The room suddenly felt even colder. Daniel glanced back toward the file in his hands. And somehow I ended up connected to this. Elijah's expression hardened slightly. Not connected. Positioned. Daniel did not understand at first. Then realization slowly crept into him. His patrol assignments. His transfer requests being denied. Cases constantly redirected through him. The disappearances always somehow touching his reports without ever fully reaching him. Somebody had been using his name. Using his reputation. You were the perfect shield, Elijah continued quietly. Aggressive officer. Multiple complaints. Public image problems. Easy for people to believe. Daniel felt anger rise inside his chest, but beneath it was something worse. Shame. Because part of him understood exactly why it worked. He remembered traffic stops that escalated too quickly. Civilians he dismissed before listening. Assumptions he never questioned because they felt easier than doubt. Ashbury had changed him slowly over the years until suspicion became instinct and instinct became identity. Elijah watched him carefully before continuing. The people behind this operation needed someone the public would blame if everything collapsed. Daniel looked toward the photographs again, his own face staring back from printed surveillance stills like a stranger wearing his uniform. So you used me too, he said quietly. Elijah did not deny it. Silence settled heavily between them while emergency lights flickered across rows of filing cabinets stretching endlessly into darkness. Finally, Elijah spoke again. I needed somebody inside this department who still cared about truth more than loyalty. Daniel laughed bitterly under his breath. You picked the wrong man. Elijah's eyes narrowed slightly. No, I picked the man they underestimated. Before Daniel could answer, a loud metallic crash echoed somewhere deeper inside the station. Everyone froze instantly. Victor reached toward his radio. Officer Reed's voice suddenly burst through the static-filled speaker near the hallway. Daniel, Reed shouted breathlessly. The surveillance server is gone. Officer Reed's voice crackled through the radio again, sharper this time, almost panicked. The entire surveillance archive is offline. Somebody pulled the physical backup drives. Daniel Mercer did not wait for another word. He shoved the thick file back into Victor Hale's hands and rushed out of the records room, boots pounding against the hallway floor while emergency lights painted the station in flashing red shadows. Elijah Brooks followed closely behind, calm but focused, his eyes scanning every corner they passed. The atmosphere inside the precinct had completely changed now. Officers stood frozen beside their desks, confused whispers spreading through the bullpen as computer screens blinked dark one after another. Nobody understood what was happening, but everybody could feel the fear moving through the building. Daniel reached the surveillance room near the west corridor and immediately stopped in the doorway. Metal storage racks had been left open. Several hard drive bays sat empty beneath blinking server lights. A technician stood near the wall, pale-faced and sweating. "I turned around for maybe 30 seconds, the man said nervously. Then the backup case was gone. Victor arrived seconds later, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the room. "How many drives?" "6. Daniel cursed quietly under his breath. 6 drives meant months of footage. Traffic cameras, booking areas, interrogation rooms, patrol archives. Enough evidence to expose half the city if somebody knew where to look. Or enough evidence to bury people forever. If it disappeared." Elijah stepped toward one of the monitors, still flickering weakly with static. "They are moving too fast," he said quietly. Daniel turned sharply. "Who?" Elijah looked directly at him. "People who know the investigation is collapsing." Daniel rubbed both hands over his face, exhaustion and frustration crashing together inside him. "You keep talking in circles." Elijah's voice remained calm. "Because names get people killed in this city." The room fell silent again. Daniel hated how believable that sounded now. Earlier tonight, he would have dismissed words like that as paranoia. But after the file, after the missing evidence, after watching officers inside his own department suddenly avoid eye contact whenever corruption was mentioned, denial no longer felt possible. Then Officer Reed stepped inside, holding a tablet computer. "You need to see this." He turned the screen toward Daniel. Security footage from the station parking garage appeared grainy beneath timestamp numbers flashing in the corner. The video showed Officer Tanner loading a black equipment case into an unmarked SUV less than 15 minutes earlier. But that was not the worst part. Daniel leaned closer, his stomach tightening immediately. Another figure stepped into frame beside Tanner. A man wearing a dark overcoat. Tall, broad shoulders, familiar posture. "No," Daniel whispered. Victor narrowed his eyes at the screen. "Who is that?" Daniel answered slowly, disbelief creeping into his voice. "Captain Howard Whitaker." The room seemed to shrink around them. Captain Whitaker was not just another officer. He ran internal operations across 3 districts. 27 years in law enforcement. Decorated career. Public face of department reform. The man city officials put in front of cameras whenever another scandal hit the headlines. Daniel felt cold suddenly. Because if Whitaker was involved, then this operation had roots far deeper than patrol officers or missing evidence lockers. Elijah looked toward the paused security image carefully. He knows the federal task force is closing in. Victor crossed his arms tightly, which means he is trying to erase every connection before. Sunrise. Daniel stared at Whitaker's frozen image on the monitor while memories replayed through his mind. Promotions denied without explanation. Evidence requests delayed. Witnesses transferred. Entire investigations quietly disappearing after meetings behind closed doors. All roads suddenly led to the same place. And the worst part was realizing how long the system had hidden in plain sight. Thunder shook the station again while rain slammed violently against the windows. Somewhere outside, distant sirens echoed through Ashbury's sleeping streets. Elijah finally spoke, his voice low enough that only Daniel could hear it. "You wanted to know why I let you stop me tonight." Daniel looked at him carefully. Elijah's eyes never left the frozen image of Captain Whitaker on the screen. "Because I needed to see whether you would protect the badge," he said quietly, "or protect the truth." The storm over Ashbury intensified as midnight crept closer, turning the city streets outside the precinct into rivers of distorted neon reflections. Inside the surveillance room, nobody spoke for several long seconds after Elijah Brooks' words settled into the silence. Officer Daniel Mercer stared at the paused image of Captain Howard Whitaker on the monitor, and for the first time in his career, the badge on his chest felt heavier than armor. It felt like a target. Victor Hale stepped toward the server console, and connected a small encrypted drive into one of the remaining active terminals. There is still one backup system they do not know about, he said quietly. The screen flickered several times before security footage slowly began restoring frame by frame. Grainy hallway recordings, parking garage timestamps, patrol dispatch archives. Every recovered second felt dangerous now. Daniel watched carefully as footage from earlier that night appeared on screen. Officer Tanner entering restricted records. Tanner removing storage drives. Tanner making calls from an unregistered cell phone. But then another video surfaced. Daniel leaned forward immediately. The timestamp showed less than 30 minutes before he first stopped Elijah on the street. The footage came from outside Franklin Market near the East Side Rail Station. A black SUV parked beside the alley. Two men unloading large containers into the back entrance of an abandoned warehouse. One of them was Tanner. The other wore plain clothes, but Daniel recognized him instantly. Detective Leon Graves. No, Daniel whispered under his breath. Graves had worked missing persons for nearly 8 years. He attended community vigils, spoke at churches, promised grieving families he would never stop searching for their children. Elijah's eyes remained fixed on the screen. He fed information directly into the trafficking routes. Daniel felt sick. Every missing face from old case files flashed through his mind one after another. Teenagers, young women, runaways, people whose names slowly disappeared from headlines because nobody powerful cared long enough to keep searching. And all this time, the men pretending to investigate had been protecting the system itself. Keep going, Daniel said quietly. Victor restored another clip. This one came from an internal hallway camera inside the precinct from 3 weeks earlier. Captain Whitaker stood outside the evidence division speaking with 2 officers. The audio was damaged, but a few words came through clearly between bursts of static. Federal Task Force. Move everything. Mercer cannot know. Daniel froze completely. Elijah turned toward him slowly. That is why your file existed. Daniel swallowed hard. They thought I would eventually get too close. They needed somebody to blame before that happened. Elijah answered calmly. Rain hammered the windows harder than ever now while emergency lights continued washing the station in flashing red. Somewhere in the building, officers still moved through hallways unaware their entire department was collapsing around them. Daniel suddenly remembered every warning he ignored over the years. Civilians accusing officers of misconduct. Families begging police to listen. Young black men insisting they were being watched unfairly. He used to believe suspicion kept the city safe. Now he realized suspicion had blinded him to the real threat, standing beside him the entire time, wearing the same uniform. He trusted. Elijah stepped closer to the monitor, his reflection blending with Daniel's in the dark screen glass. You know why they underestimated you? Daniel looked at him silently. Elijah's voice stayed low and steady. Because men like Whitaker think racism is useful. Daniel frowned slightly. Elijah continued. They knew your reputation. They knew people would believe the worst about you before they questioned the system above you. The truth hit harder than any accusation ever could. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, remembering the crowd watching earlier that night while he pinned Elijah against the patrol car beneath flashing lights. He remembered the assumptions, the anger, the certainty in his own voice. And suddenly he understood something terrifying. Whitaker never needed Daniel to be corrupt. He only needed him angry enough to stop asking questions. Then Victor's radio crackled sharply. Federal units are approaching the precinct, a voice announced through static. Target suspects are attempting to leave the city. Elijah looked toward Daniel one final time. This is the moment that decides who you really are, officer. The sound of approaching sirens rolled through Ashbury like a storm finally reaching shore. Blue and red lights flooded the rain-soaked streets outside the precinct while federal vehicles surrounded the building one by one, their headlights cutting through the darkness that had hidden the city's secrets for far too long. Inside the surveillance room, Officer Daniel Mercer stood motionless beside Elijah Brooks and Victor Hale, staring at the corrupted system that had shaped his entire career without him realizing it. Somewhere downstairs, voices began rising. Doors opening. Boots moving quickly across tile floors. The operation was no longer hidden. It was collapsing in real time. Victor checked his watch once before speaking into his radio. Federal teams are in position. Move now. Within seconds, shouting echoed through the lower levels of the station. Officers scrambled through hallways while detectives poured out of offices demanding answers nobody could give. Daniel moved toward the window overlooking the parking lot just in time to see Captain Howard Whitaker being stopped beside a black SUV near the rear exit gate. The older man still wore the same composed expression he carried at press conferences and city council meetings. But for the first time, Daniel noticed fear behind it. Real fear. Not fear of criminals. Fear of exposure. Elijah stepped beside Daniel quietly. Rainwater streaked across the glass between them and the chaos unfolding outside. He built an entire system around silence, Elijah said calmly. And silence only survives until somebody stops being afraid of the truth. Daniel watched federal agents escort Officer Tanner across the flooded parking lot while more unmarked vehicles arrived from surrounding districts. Detectives Daniel had trusted for years were now being separated, questioned, searched. Some looked angry. Others looked terrified. But none of them looked surprised. That realization hurt them most. Deep down, too many people inside the department had always known something was wrong. They just convinced themselves survival mattered more than honesty. Daniel lowered his eyes toward his own reflection in the rain-covered glass. Earlier that same night, he had pinned Elijah against a patrol car in front of a crowd because suspicion came easier to him than understanding. He remembered the fear in the faces watching him, the phone's recording, the certainty in his voice when he demanded answers from a man he never truly tried to see. "You could have exposed me from the beginning," Daniel said quietly. Elijah nodded once. "Yes. Why did you not?" Elijah remained silent for a moment before answering. "Because men like Whitaker survive by making people hate each other before they start asking questions." Daniel looked at him carefully. Elijah's calm never felt arrogant. It felt tired, like someone who had spent years carrying truths nobody wanted to hear. "You thought I would change," Daniel said softly. Elijah's eyes stayed fixed on the rain outside. "I thought you still could." The words settled heavily between them. Somewhere below, Captain Whitaker was escorted toward a federal vehicle while camera crews began gathering beyond police barricades outside the station. By morning, Ashbury would wake up to headlines exposing corruption, trafficking networks, missing evidence, and officers who used fear as protection. But standing there in the dim surveillance room, Daniel realized the biggest story would never appear on television. It was the quieter truth, the dangerous truth. That entire systems could survive for years not because everybody was evil, but because too many people stopped questioning what felt normal. Elijah turned toward the exit corridor, preparing to leave. Daniel stopped him with one final question. "After everything tonight, why did you trust me at all?" Elijah paused beneath the flashing emergency lights. Then he looked back calmly and said the words Daniel Mercer would remember for the rest of his life. "Because the moment you started listening instead of assuming, you stopped being the man they wanted you to become." Elijah disappeared down the hallway moments later while rain continued falling across Ashbury's empty streets. Daniel remained standing alone beside the glowing monitors, listening to distant sirens echo through the city he thought he understood. And for the first time in years, the badge on his chest no longer felt like power. It felt like responsibility.